Commander Vexthal pressed his chitinous body against the jagged crystal rocks, feeling their cold surface through his protective suit. His homeworld of Rolonia was nothing like this desolate frontier planet, with its strange purple sky and twin moons casting eerie shadows across the battlefield. The pale blue skin of his elongated frame glistened with moisture as he adjusted his position, her black eyes independently tracking movement in the valley below. The human encampment sprawled across the rocky terrain like a metal infection. Vexthal had studied 17 different species before their conquest, and none had impressed him. Zelkari had superior technology, but crumbled under pressure. Morphins possessed incredible strength, but lacked tactical thinking. Brinks could phase through solid matter, yet fell to simple coordination. Every species had a weakness that the Rylonian Empire exploited with ruthless efficiency. But humans were different. Something about their camp unsettled him in ways he couldn't identify. Scout Krellanax crawled up beside him, his breathing apparatus hissing softly in the thin atmosphere. The younger Rylonian's 3 arms moved with nervous energy as he calibrated, his optical enhancer zooming in on the human fortifications below. "Commander, these humans appear remarkably primitive," Krellanax whispered, his voice carrying the confidence of youth. "Look at their weapon systems. Crude projectile launchers that require physical ammunition. No energy shields, no plasma cannons, no molecular disruptors. Their defensive barriers are literally just stacked metal plates." Vexthal nodded slowly, but something nagged at him. Humans moved with a purpose that seemed almost ritualistic. They weren't just soldiers going through motions, they were a coordinated organism with each individual playing a specific role. Their bipedal forms looked fragile compared to Rylonian physiology, yet they carried equipment that should have been too heavy for their smaller frames. Through his enhanced scope, Vexthal focused on the human commander. She was a female with short, dark hair that gleamed under the alien sunlight, her olive skin marked with small scars that spoke of previous battles. Her uniform bore insignia indicating high rank. But more importantly, every human in the camp seemed to orient themselves around her presence. When she moved, others adjusted their positions. When she gestured, they responded instantly. "Fascinating," Vexthal murmured. "Their hierarchy is based on respect rather than fear." The human female Captain Kim, according to intercepted communications, stood atop a makeshift platform addressing her troops. Even from this distance, Vexthal could see the intensity. In her posture, the way her hands moved as she spoke, the complete attention she commanded from her soldiers. "Sir, should we begin the assault?" Krellanax asked, his finger hovering over the communication device. Behind them, hidden in the crystal caves, 200 Rylonian shock troopers waited for the signal. Vexthal studied the human camp one more time. Standard Rylonian doctrine called for overwhelming force applied to command structures. Eliminate leadership, and most species would surrender or scatter. It had worked on every world they'd conquered. "Target the command structure first," Vexthal ordered into his communicator, his voice carrying across encrypted channels to the assault teams. "Begin Phase 1 assault." The first plasma bolt shrieked across the valley like a falling star, striking the human camp's outer perimeter with devastating force. The energy discharge vaporized a section of their metal barriers and sent shockwaves rippling through the ground. Vexthal expected to see panic, confusion, the inevitable breakdown of order that preceded easy victory. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't seek cover. They didn't follow any logical, tactical doctrine that Vexthal recognized from his military training. They charged. Captain Kim leaped from her platform with a battle cry that echoed across the valley, her weapon firing in controlled bursts as she sprinted directly toward the Rylonian positions. Behind her, every human soldier abandoned their defensive positions and followed, their primitive weapons blazing with an intensity that defied their technological limitations. "What are they doing?" Krellanax gasped, his optical enhancer tracking the impossible assault. "Sir, they're charging directly into our kill zone." But the humans weren't just charging blindly. Captain Kim coordinated flanking maneuvers while running, using hand signals and shouted commands to direct her troops with surgical precision. They leaped over obstacles, rolled under cover, and provided suppressing fire for each other in ways that shouldn't have been possible given their inferior equipment. A human explosive detonated close enough to shower Vextel's position with crystal fragments. Through the chaos, he watched in fascination as the humans displayed coordination that bordered on the supernatural. They moved like a single organism with multiple limbs, each soldier anticipating the other's actions without apparent communication. "Sir, they're not following standard retreat protocols." Krellenak stammered as another explosion rocked their position. "They're using wounded soldiers as mobile cover while the injured continue fighting." Vextel couldn't believe what his eyes were witnessing. A human soldier with a severe leg wound had positioned himself to provide covering fire, while two others used his position as a shield to advance. Instead of evacuating their wounded, they incorporated them into their tactical formations. The humans turned debris into weapons, using chunks of destroyed barriers as projectiles and makeshift shields. They displayed a coordination that suggested telepathic communication, yet his scanners detected no psychic emanations. They were reading each other's intentions through pure experience and trust. Plasma fire from the Rolonian shock troopers forced Vextel's reconnaissance team to abandon their position. As they withdrew deeper into the crystal caves, he found himself genuinely shaken for the first time in his military career. These humans fought like creatures possessed by something beyond rational thought. They fought like beings who had never learned that some battles couldn't be won. The twisted wreckage of Hellpoint Station rose from the barren landscape like the skeleton of some ancient beast. 3 days had passed since the disastrous first encounter, and Vextel found himself studying the mining facility through his scope with a mixture of professional interest and growing unease. The massive industrial complex stretched across several kilometers, its rusted towers and processing plants connected by a maze of catwalks and transport tubes. What should have been a simple mop-up operation had turned into something far more disturbing. General Zarthek's voice crackled through the encrypted communication channel, his tone sharp with impatience. "Commander Vextel, report. How many humans remain inside that facility?" Vextel adjusted his scanner readings, double-checking the thermal signatures scattered throughout the complex. The numbers made no sense, according to standard military doctrine. "Scans indicate 12 humans, sir. Possibly 15 at most. Our thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures, but some could be equipment or decoys." 12 humans, the general repeated with obvious disbelief. "You're telling me that 12 humans are holding off an entire Rolonian battalion?" Through his scope, Vextel watched another assault team approach the station's main entrance. Rolonian shock troopers moved with practiced efficiency, their plasma rifles charged and ready. They should have overwhelmed any resistance within minutes. Instead, the mining facility erupted in a coordinated defense that defied every tactical manual Vextel had ever studied. Sergeant Park appeared at a window on the 3rd level, his weapon tracking the advancing soldiers with mechanical precision. The human male moved between defensive positions, like he could see the future, somehow anticipating Rolonian attack patterns before they fully developed. His dark hair was matted with sweat and dust, his uniform torn in several places, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. "Contact left," Park shouted to his team, his voice carrying clearly across the complex. "Lee, take the mining tunnel." Han, elevated position on the processing tower, privately emerged from a concealed position, and Vextel immediately understood why the humans had proven so difficult to predict. The young female soldier moved with a wild energy that seemed to feed on the chaos of battle. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, but she was actually smiling as she fired her weapon, as if the desperate situation somehow thrilled her. "Corporal." Han's position on the processing tower gave him a perfect view of the approaching Rolonian forces. His marksmanship was impossible. Each shot found its target with surgical precision. Despite the considerable distance and his primitive projectile weapon, Vextel watched through his scope as Han fired 8 shots and eliminated 8 Rolonian soldiers, each bullet finding the exact gap in their armor. "They're using the mining equipment as weapons," Krellenak observed, his voice tight with worry. "Sir, that's not standard military equipment they're operating." The humans had somehow repurposed the entire mining facility into a fortress. Drilling lasers meant for cutting through solid rock now carved through Relonian armor with devastating effect. Conveyor belts carried improvised explosives to strategic positions. Even the ore processing machinery had been modified to launch projectiles at incoming assault teams. Vextal winced as a massive drilling laser swept across the battlefield, its industrial-grade beam vaporizing another Relonian squad. The weapon wasn't designed for combat, but in human hands. It had become more deadly than military-grade plasma cannons. What disturbed Vextal most wasn't their tactical creativity, was their complete disregard for personal safety. When Private Lee took shrapnel to her shoulder from a plasma grenade, she didn't retreat to the medical station. Instead, she used her injury as motivation, rigging explosives throughout the mining tunnels with reckless determination. "Watch this," she called to Han, her voice carrying a note of excitement despite her obvious pain. "I'm going to bring down Tunnel 7 on their heads." The explosion that followed claimed an entire Relonian platoon, but Lee had positioned herself dangerously close to the blast zone. Any rational soldier would have prioritized medical treatment and tactical withdrawal. Instead, she seemed energized by her wound. Fighting with even greater intensity, the siege stretched into its third day, and the situation only became more incomprehensible. Relonian casualties mounted steadily while the human defenders seemed to grow more dangerous, not weaker. Vexel observed them through his scope during quiet moments, trying to understand their psychology. They slept in shifts, with some humans resting while others maintained watch. But even their rest periods were coordinated. They shared their limited food supplies without hesitation, gave their better equipment to whoever needed it most, and never once complained about their desperate situation. "Sir," Krellinax reported, monitoring communication intercepts, "the humans have received multiple surrender offers. Standard terms, medical treatment, prisoner exchange, territorial concessions. They're not even responding to our diplomatic channels." Vextal shook his head in disbelief. Any rational species would have accepted the terms General Zarthex had offered. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no hope of reinforcement. Their position was hopeless by any objective measure, yet they continued fighting as if victory was inevitable. On the third night, Sergeant Park addressed his team from the station's command center. Vextal managed to intercept the transmission, hoping to finally understand human psychology. "We're not leaving," Park said simply. "This is our line. Whatever happens, we hold it." "Understood," Sergeant Han replied, checking his weapon. "How much ammunition do we have left?" Nuffley answered, with that same wild smile. "And if we run out, we'll make more." The casual way they discussed their impossible situation sent chills through Vexiel's body. These humans weren't brave. They were something beyond brave. They had entered a mental state where defeat simply wasn't a possibility they could conceive. Sir Krellinax whispered urgently, his scanner detecting new readings. "I'm detecting massive energy buildup in the station's core. The reactor output is climbing beyond safe parameters." Vextal's 4 eyes widened as he realized what the readings meant. The humans weren't just planning to hold their position, they were preparing to overload the entire facility's power. "Core! They're going to destroy the reactor!" he breathed, horrified. "They intend to take the entire facility and everyone in it rather than accept defeat." The implications were staggering. The humans would rather die than surrender, and they were willing to take hundreds of Relonian soldiers with them. So this wasn't just desperate resistance, it was a fundamental rejection of the concept of acceptable losses. The reactor never overloaded. Instead, the ground shook with a different kind of explosion, the thunderous roar of human dropships, breaking through the atmosphere like falling meteors. Vextal pressed against the station's reinforced windows, watching in amazement as Captain Kim's reinforcements descended from the purple sky in a coordinated assault that shattered every assumption he'd made about human military capabilities. The dropships didn't land. They crashed with controlled violence, their armored hulls carving deep furrows in the rocky terrain. Before the dust settled, human soldiers poured out like a swarm of angry insects, their weapons blazing as they charged directly into Relonian defensive positions. Captain Kim led the assault personally, her battle cry audible even through the station's thick walls. She moved across the battlefield like a force of nature, directing her troops with hand signals while firing her weapon with devastating accuracy. Where she appeared, Rellonian lines crumbled. Possible, Vextel whispered, watching his own forces scatter before the human onslaught. They're breaking through a fortified position with a frontal assault. The Rellonian battalion that had seemed so overwhelming just hours earlier was now retreating in disorder. General Zarthek's voice crackled over the communication channels, barking orders that no one seemed able to follow. The humans had turned the entire battlefield into chaos, and somehow they thrived in that chaos while the Rellonian forces foundered. In the confusion of the retreat, Vextel found himself separated from Krellenax and the rest of his reconnaissance team. A plasma explosion had collapsed part of the mining station's upper level, trapping him in the lower maintenance tunnels with a severe injury to his left leg. Green blood seeped through his armor as he dragged himself deeper into the facility. Seeking shelter from the battle raging above, the tunnels were dark and filled with the hum of machinery. Vextel's eyes adapted quickly to the low light, but his wounded leg made every step agony. He could hear human voices echoing through the corridors as they secured the facility, their footsteps growing closer. When Sergeant Park found him huddled in a storage alcove, Vextel expected immediate execution. He had observed enough human combat to know they were merciless warriors. He closed his eyes and prepared for the end. Instead, he felt gentle hands examining his wound. "Easy there." Park's voice was calm and professional. "You're hurt pretty bad, but it's not fatal. Hold still while I take a look." Vextel's 4 eyes snapped open in confusion. Park knelt beside him, his medical kit already open, hands working efficiently to assess the alien's injuries. The human's face showed concentration, not hatred or anger. "Why help me?" Vextel managed to ask in broken human standard. His translator, struggling with the unfamiliar language, Park looked up from bandaging the alien's wounded limb, his expression genuinely puzzled by the question. "'Cause you're hurt, and I'm a medic first, soldier second." This made absolutely no tactical sense. Vextel was an enemy combatant with potentially valuable intelligence about Rellonian military operations. Standard procedure would be interrogation. Medical treatment only to keep him alive for questioning, an eventual prisoner exchange, or execution. Yet here was Park, sharing his limited medical supplies with someone who had been trying to kill him just hours earlier. "Your wound needs proper cleaning," Park continued, working with practiced efficiency. "This might sting a bit." Antiseptic burned, but Park's hands were gentle despite their obvious strength. As he worked, other human soldiers established defensive positions throughout the lower levels, but they moved around the medical treatment as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Over the following days, as Rellonian forces regrouped for another assault on the station, Vextel found himself in the unique position of observing human behavior from the inside. What he saw challenged everything he thought he understood about military psychology. Private Lee still bore bandages from her previous injuries, but she joked with her comrades while cleaning her weapon and preparing for what appeared to be another hopeless battle. Her humor wasn't forced or desperate. She genuinely found amusement in their situation, as if the constant threat of death was just another part of daily life. "Hey Park," she called across the maintenance bay. "Remember that time on Kepler 7 when we held off those raiders with nothing but mining charges and pure stubbornness?" "Which time?" Park replied with a grin. "That happened at least 3 times. That month, Corporal Hahn worked quietly at his elevated position, but Vextel noticed how he shared his rations without being asked, somehow always knowing when someone else needed food more than he did. When a younger soldier looked nervous about the approaching battle, Hahn would casually sit nearby, his calm presence seeming to steady everyone around him. Most puzzling of all, they included Vextel in their conversations, sometimes forgetting he was their prisoner. He asked about his homeworld, his family, his interests outside of military service. They shared stories about their own lives, their hopes, their fears about the war. "You know," Lee said during one quiet moment, "my sister back on Earth is probably worrying herself sick about me right now. She always said I was too stubborn for my own good." "Your sister sounds smart," Han replied. Maybe you should listen to her more often. Where's the fun in that? Lee laughed. But Vexel could hear genuine affection in her voice when she spoke of her family. During a particularly quiet watch, Vexel finally worked up the courage to voice the question that had been troubling him. You fight strangely, he told Park, who was maintaining his equipment nearby. How so? You risk everything for small gains. You sacrifice strategic advantages for... Vexel searched for the right word and human standard for each other. Park paused in his work, considering the observation seriously. When he looked up, his expression was thoughtful rather than defensive. That's not a sacrifice, he said quietly. That's the point. Before Vexel could ask what he meant, the station's proximity alarms began blaring. The next Relonian assault was beginning. And once again, Vexel found himself watching from his corner as the humans transformed from relaxed, friendly people into something far more terrifying. But this time, he began to see the pattern. Private Lee took risks that should have been fatal. She did it to protect Han's sniper position. When Corporal Han exposed himself to enemy fire, it was to give Park time to reach wounded soldiers. When Sergeant Park made decisions that seemed tactically unsound, it was because he was thinking about his team's survival rather than military objectives. They weren't fighting for territory resources or even victory in any conventional sense. They were fighting to protect each other, and that motivation transformed them into something beyond ordinary soldiers. Each human became willing to face impossible odds because they knew their comrades would do the same for them. The realization was more disturbing than their tactical unpredictability. Vexel had spent his career studying military psychology, learning how to break enemy morale and exploit weaknesses in command structure. But how do you defeat an enemy whose greatest strength comes from caring about each other? As plasma fire lit up the maintenance bay, and the humans began their deadly dance of coordinated combat, Vexel understood that he wasn't just observing a military unit. He was witnessing something far more dangerous, a family that had chosen to go to war together. The ground beneath Hellpoint Station began trembling at dawn, subtle vibrations that gradually built into violent shaking. Vexel's 4 eyes tracked the seismic readings on his scanner with growing alarm. The planet's unstable core was shifting, and the mining operations had weakened the underground structure more than anyone realized. Earthquake, Park shouted, grabbing Vexel's arm as the maintenance bay lurched sideways. Equipment crashed from shelves, and the lights flickered ominously. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the Relonian forward base in the distance, its defensive towers swaying like trees in a storm. The seismic event lasted only minutes, but its effects were catastrophic. Hellpoint Station's lower levels cracked open like an eggshell, releasing clouds of toxic gas from the mining operations below. The poisonous yellow vapor billowed upward, forcing everyone to higher ground while making the lower tunnels completely uninhabitable. Worse yet, the earthquake had triggered a massive rock slide that buried the main access routes between the human and Relonian positions. Soldiers from both sides found themselves trapped in the same damaged facility, their weapons suddenly less important than their shared need for survival. Vexel watched in fascination as the toxic gases created an eerie, yellow fog that drifted through the station's corridors. His breathing apparatus filtered the worst of it, but he could see human soldiers struggling with the contaminated air. Several had already collapsed, their primitive respiratory systems unable to cope with the industrial toxins. Then Captain Kim's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, her transmission reaching both human and Relonian forces. All personnel, human and Relonian, respond to emergency beacon. Civilian transport vessels are trapped in the collapse zone. Immediate rescue operations are now in effect. Stared at Park in complete disbelief. The human sergeant was already checking his emergency equipment, preparing to venture into the most dangerous parts of the facility. She's ordering rescue operations for civilians during active combat. Of course, Park replied without hesitation, shouldering his medical pack. Their innocence. The concept made no sense from a military perspective. There were still Relonian soldiers in the facility who would likely shoot any human they encountered. The toxic gases made rescue operations extremely dangerous, and the structural damage could cause further collapse at any moment. Any rational commander would focus on evacuating their own forces first. But Captain Kim was already coordinating something unprecedented. Through the damaged communication systems, Vextel listened as she organized joint rescue operations between species that had been killing each other just hours earlier. Team Alpha, focus on the Eastern Transport Hub. Kim's voice carried absolute authority. Team Beta, secure the Western evacuation routes. Medical personnel from both sides report to the main triage area. We have Relonian civilians trapped in the collapsed passenger section. What followed challenged everything Vextel understood about warfare and military psychology. Human and Relonian soldiers began working side by side, following Kim's coordinated rescue efforts with the same precision they had shown in combat. The human captain treated alien civilians with the same urgency as her own species, organizing medical triage and evacuation routes without any regard for military advantage. Private Lee volunteered for the most dangerous assignment, crawling through unstable tunnels to reach trapped Relonian younglings in the passenger section. The spaces were so narrow that only someone of her small stature could navigate them. The toxic gases were concentrated in the lower areas where the children were trapped. Vextel watched through a cracked viewport as Lee disappeared into a maintenance tunnel barely wide enough for her shoulders. The tunnel could collapse at any moment, and the gas concentrations were potentially fatal even with protective equipment. She was risking her life for alien children she had never met. 20 minutes later, she emerged from a different tunnel, bloody but triumphant, carrying two small Relonian younglings. Their pale blue skin was tinged with yellow from gas exposure, but they were alive. Lee handed them to a Relonian medic, then immediately prepared to go back for more survivors. There are at least 6 more down there, she reported to Kim, wiping green blood from a cut on her forehead. The tunnel system is complex, but I can map it as I go. Corporal Han had taken over the facility's technical systems, using his expertise to stabilize failing life support systems throughout the complex. He worked alongside Relonian engineers, sharing knowledge and coordinating repairs while enemy forces remained in the area. His modifications to the air filtration system saved dozens of lives, creating safe zones where both species could breathe. A Relonian officer approached Captain Kim, his translator conveying obvious frustration. This is inefficient. We should evacuate our forces first, then consider civilian rescue operations. Your methods waste valuable time and resources. Kim turned to face the alien officer, her expression calm but absolutely firm. No, we evacuate based on medical priority. Species doesn't matter. Injury severity determines treatment order. The Relonian officer's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion that Vextel recognized. You would treat our wounded before your own healthy soldiers. If they need it more, yes, Kim replied without hesitation. A wounded enemy is still a wounded person. Vextel found himself working alongside Park to clear rubble from a collapsed section where they had detected life signs. Their previous enmity seemed insignificant compared to the immediate need to save lives. As they lifted chunks of concrete and twisted metal, he began to understand something profound about human nature. The work was backbreaking. Each piece of debris had to be carefully removed to avoid further collapse, and the toxic gases made every breath a struggle. But Park worked with the same dedication he had shown in combat, his movements efficient and tireless.
You don't just
Fight for your pack, Vextel said as they pulled another survivor from the wreckage. A Relonian civilian who had been traveling through the system when the disaster struck. No, Park agreed, carefully checking the injured alien for broken bones before passing him to the medical team. We fight for anyone who needs fighting for. The rescue operations continued for 18 grueling hours. The teams worked in shifts, with humans and Relonian soldiers alternating between rescue duties and equipment maintenance. The toxic gases gradually cleared as Han's modifications to the ventilation system took effect. But the structural damage made every operation dangerous. Vextel watched Captain Kim coordinate the entire effort with the same tactical brilliance she had shown in combat, but now directed towards saving lives rather than taking them. She made decisions that prioritized the most vulnerable children, elderly, and injured, regardless of their species. When a section of tunnel collapsed while Private Lee was inside, Both human and Relonian soldiers worked frantically to dig her out. When they finally reached her, she was unconscious, but still clutching a small Relonian child she had shielded with her own body. When the rescue operations finally ended, more than 300 lives had been saved, human, Relonian, and several other species who had been caught in the disaster. The humans had risked everything, gained no tactical advantage, and somehow emerged stronger for the experience. As Vextal helped load the last of the survivors onto evacuation transports, he realized that he had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. These humans hadn't just fought against their enemies, they had fought for them when it mattered most. The rescue had cost them precious supplies, exposed their positions, and exhausted their forces. By any military standard, it had been a strategic disaster. But as he watched human and Relonian survivors helping each other board the transport, Ship's Vextal understood that the humans had won something far more valuable than a tactical victory. They had won something that no weapon could destroy and no strategy could defeat: the knowledge that they were willing to risk everything for what they believed was right. The journey back to Relonia took 3 months aboard the military transport vessel Void Stalker. During those long weeks in hyperspace, Vextal sat in his quarters staring at the incomplete report on his holographic display. The words seemed inadequate, unable to capture the reality of what he had experienced on that distant frontier world. How do you explain the impossible to beings who have never seen it themselves? The Relonian High Council chambers were exactly as Vextal remembered: vast crystalline walls that reflected light in patterns designed to intimidate. With the 12 council members seated on elevated platforms that forced visitors to look up at them like supplicants. The air hummed with the energy of advanced technology, and holographic displays showed the current status of the Empire's 17 conquered star systems. Vextal walked across the polished floor, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. His report was complete, but remained unsent to the Council's data systems. Some information was too dangerous to trust to electronic transmission. It had to be delivered in person, where tone and context could convey what mere words could not. "Commander Vextal," announced High Counselor Vexura, her voice carrying the authority of absolute power. "You have returned from the human frontier. Present your tactical assessment." The 12 council members leaned forward expectantly, their multiple eyes focusing on him with predatory interest. They expected another routine conquest report, detailing human weaknesses and the projected timeline for their subjugation. The humans possess no superior technology. Vextal began carefully, choosing each word with precision. "Their weapons are primitive projectile systems based on chemical propellants. Their ships are outdated, constructed with materials we abandoned centuries ago. Their tactics appear suicidal by every measure of rational military doctrine." Satisfied murmurs rippled through the council chamber. This was exactly what they wanted: to hear confirmation that humanity posed no significant threat to Relonian expansion. However, Vextal continued, his voice carrying a weight that made the murmurs die away. They possessed something far more dangerous than superior firepower. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from satisfaction to curious concern. General Mordok, the Empire's supreme military commander, leaned forward on his platform. "Explain," Mordok commanded, his voice sharp with impatience. Vextal activated his holographic display, and the chamber filled with three-dimensional recordings from the human front lines. The images were stark and powerful: Captain Kim rallying her troops against impossible odds, her battle cry echoing through the crystal acoustics of the council chamber, Sergeant Park tending to wounded Relonian soldiers with the same care he showed his own people, privately crawling through toxic tunnels to save alien children she had never met, Corporal Han sharing his rations with enemy prisoners. "They fight not just to win," Vextal explained as the holographic scenes played out before the stunned council, "but to protect. Every battle to them is a battle for survival, not just their own, but for everything they hold dear. They will endure impossible losses, attempt impossible victories, and show impossible mercy, because they believe every life has value." The holographic display showed the rescue operations at Help Point Station, humans and Relonian soldiers working side by side, their previous enmity forgotten in the face of greater need. The images were undeniable evidence of something the Council had never encountered in their centuries of conquest. General Mordock shifted impatiently on his platform, his four eyes narrowing with skepticism. "This sounds like weakness, Commander. Emotional attachment is a liability in warfare. Tase. Mercy toward enemies is tactical foolishness. It is not weakness." Vextel replied quietly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "It is the most terrifying strength in the galaxy." He paused, letting that statement sink in before continuing. The holographic display shifted to show human soldiers in impossible situations, outnumbered, outgunned, facing certain defeat, yet somehow emerging victorious through sheer determination and tactical creativity. When humans fight, they fight as if the universe itself depends on their victory. They cannot be broken because they refuse to accept that anything is truly broken. They cannot be defeated because they do not understand the concept of acceptable losses. The council chamber had grown completely silent. Even the ambient hum of the advanced technology seemed muted as the implications of Vextel's words settled over the assembled leaders. He activated another section of his report, showing tactical analyses that defied conventional military wisdom. Human units performing at efficiency levels that should have been impossible. Soldiers fighting effectively while wounded, exhausted, and hopelessly outnumbered. Command structures that remained functional even after losing their leadership. "I observed their psychological conditioning during extended contact," Vexel continued. "They told me that sacrifice isn't really sacrifice when you're protecting what matters. They fight not because they must, but because they choose to, and they choose to fight for everyone, even their enemies." The holographic display showed the moment when Private Lee emerged from the toxic tunnels, carrying Relonian children to safety despite her own injuries. It showed Sergeant Park treating Vextel's wounds while battle raged around them. It showed Captain Kim coordinating rescue operations that saved hundreds of alien lives at tremendous risk to her own forces. "Impossible," whispered Counselor Velinara, her voice barely audible. "No species prioritizes enemy welfare over tactical advantage." "The humans do," Vextel replied, consistently, without hesitation, even when it cost them dearly. General Mordock's expression had shifted from skepticism to deep concern. As the Empire's military leader, he understood the implications better than the others. "What are you recommending, Commander?" The council chamber fell silent again, waiting for Vexel's response. This moment would determine the future relationship between the Relonian Empire and humanity. His words would either launch another conquest or forge an entirely new path. "My recommendation," Vextel said, with absolute clarity, "is immediate peaceful contact and alliance. Because the alternative is not victory or defeat. The alternative is facing an enemy that will never stop coming, never stop trying, and never stop believing that tomorrow can be better than today." He submitted his report to the Council's data systems with a gesture, uploading months of observations, tactical analyses, and psychological profiles. The information would revolutionize Relonian understanding of warfare and diplomacy. Furthermore, he continued, any military action against humanity will not result in conquest. It will result in a war unlike anything our empire has ever experienced. They will fight us in space, on planets, in asteroid belts, and in the void between stars. They will turn every battlefield into Hellpoint Station. They will make every engagement a rescue mission. And they will never, ever surrender. The implications hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Relonian Empire represented. For centuries, they had expanded through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. They faced a species that fought with something far more powerful, an unshakable belief in the value of life itself. Vextel walked away from the council chambers, knowing that the Relonian Empire would never be the same. Behind him, heated debates began, immediately arguments about first contact protocols, alliance possibilities, and the strategic implications of encountering a species that fought with love as their weapon. But Vextel was no longer listening to the political maneuvering. He was thinking about Sergeant Park's gentle hands tending to his wounds, Captain Kim's unwavering determination to protect the innocent, Private Lee's wild courage in the face of impossible odds. Corporal Han's quiet strength and endless compassion. In trying to understand humanity's weaknesses, the Relonian Empire had discovered something far more profound. Humanity's greatest strength was their refusal to be anything less than human, no matter what the cost. As he walked through the crystal corridors of the Relonian capital, Vexel realized that he had witnessed the birth of a new era in galactic politics. The age of conquest through superior firepower was ending. The age of cooperation through mutual respect was about to begin, and it was all because of a small group of humans who had chosen to care about everyone, even their enemies, when it would have been easier to simply fight and die. In all the galaxy's vastness, with all its countless species and infinite possibilities, humanity had chosen to be the species that refused to give up on anyone. That choice would reshape the stars themselves. The end.